The air was thick with the scent of gunpowder, sweat, and despair. In the swirling chaos of a Civil War field hospital, amid the groans of the wounded and the frantic cries of orderlies, a woman moved with the terrifying calm of a force of nature. She was not a trained nurse, nor a doctor, nor a soldier. She was an unlikely, iron-willed farmwife named Ann Bickerdyke. And her story is not just a chapter of American history. It is a towering testament to the power of one person's relentless will to fight for humanity when the world around her descended into hell. The United States in 1861 was a land torn asunder. The secession of southern states had plunged the nation into the bloodiest conflict in its history. As men, farmers, lawyers, laborers flocked to the colors, the logistical nightmares began. Nowhere was the chaos more profound or the suffering more ignored than in the makeshift military hospitals that sprung up around training camps. In the small, quiet town of Galesburg, Illinois, Ann Bickerdyke, a widow in her mid-40s, ran a successful botanic medical practice. She was a plain-speaking, practical woman who had lost her husband, Robert, a few years prior, leaving her to raise two sons. She wasn't wealthy, but she possessed an almost frightening competence and a deep Quaker-infused humanitarian spirit. Her journey from a tranquil home to the brutal front lines began with a simple letter. A local minister, the Reverend Edward Beecher, had visited the makeshift Union encampment in Cairo, Illinois. He returned with a harrowing report. The conditions were an absolute scandal. Soldiers lay on the cold, damp ground, often without proper food or clean bandages. Dysentery, typhoid, and simple neglect were killing more men than Confederate bullets. Beecher addressed the citizens of Galesburg, pleading for someone to go to Cairo and deliver aid. Ann Bickerdyke stood up. Without hesitation, she said, "I'll go."
Chapter 1. The Clean Sweep of Cairo. Bickerdyke arrived in Cairo carrying boxes of supplies donated by the generous people of Illinois. What she saw horrified even her practical mind. The hospital was a derelict, filthy structure. The air was foul. Sick and dying men were crammed together, often lying in their own waste. The meager medical staff, some drunken, others simply inept, had surrendered to the overwhelming misery. Ann did not waste a second on outrage. She acted. She was not gentle. She was a cyclone of efficiency and righteous fury. Her first act was to find the man in charge, an incompetent surgeon who was doing little to alleviate the suffering. "Are you the man in charge of this hog pen?" she reportedly demanded, her voice cutting through the din. The surgeon, stunned by this uninvited woman, mumbled the defensive reply. Bickerdyke didn't wait. She immediately began throwing things out. She ripped filthy mattresses apart, hauled putrid food out, and found orderlies idling and put them to work. She ordered all the windows opened, letting in the cold air to fight the stench. She established a clean kitchen, and with her own hands began cooking simple, nourishing food, broth, bread, and coffee for the weakest men. She didn't ask for permission, she gave orders. When a drunken surgeon complained, she fixed him with a stare that could freeze a volcano, as one witness put it, and said, "Sir, I have the authority of the Lord God Almighty and Governor Yates of Illinois, and you had better respect it." This fierce, unwavering resolve earned her a formidable reputation. The soldiers, seeing her tireless work, her refusal to be beaten by bureaucracy or despair, adopted her as their own. They called her Mother Bickerdyke. Chapter 2. General Sherman's Daughter. Mother Bickerdyke's fame quickly spread up the chain of command, largely because the death rates in the hospitals she managed dropped precipitously. She followed the Union Army from Cairo up the Tennessee River and eventually linked her fate to two of the most critical Union generals, Ulysses S. Grant and William Tecumseh Sherman.
In the early months, her relationship with the Army's official channels was always strained. She utterly despised the bureaucratic incompetence and the widespread corruption that saw hospital supplies stolen or sold for profit. When she found a quartermaster selling government-issued whiskey that was supposed to be for medical use, she took an axe and smashed the barrel open, letting the liquor seep into the mud. "If the government is too weak to do its job, I'll do it for them," she often said. The surgeons and officers often tried to have her removed. She was a constant, loud, and effective challenge to their authority. At one point, a formal complaint reached General Sherman's desk. The officer demanded that Sherman stop that terrible woman from interfering with the hospital staff. Sherman, who had personally seen the miraculous improvement in morale and health after Bickerdyke's intervention, looked at the officer and delivered a response that became legendary. "She outranks me. You'll have to go higher. She has the authority of God Almighty." From that point on, Mary Ann was untouchable. Sherman, recognizing her singular genius for logistics and care, provided her with whatever she asked for: transportation, supplies, even a detachment of soldiers to help her manage field hospitals. She became a vital, unofficial member of his command staff. Chapter 3: Shiloh and the Kettle of Fire. The Battle of Shiloh in April 1862 was a turning point in the war and a crucible for Mother Bickerdyke. The battle was fought on a vast, muddy, and chaotic field in Tennessee. After the fighting ended, thousands of wounded men were left scattered across the landscape. The official medical response was overwhelmed.
Bickerdyke arrived on the scene with her mobile supply wagons, navigating through the fields of the dead and dying. The scene was apocalyptic. The men were suffering not just from wounds, but from exposure. A torrential rain had fallen. She quickly organized a temporary hospital near a landing on the Tennessee River. She realized that the priority was not just dressing wounds, but providing immediate comfort and sustenance. But she needed light and warmth. What she did next astonished everyone. She organized the collection of hundreds of old camp kettles and found a way to hang them over improvised fires. In these kettles, she brewed gallons of tea, coffee, and simple gruel. She was the first to recognize the necessity of immediate, mass-scale hot food on a battlefield, a concept completely foreign to military medicine at the time. But her most astounding act came after sundown. Under the cover of darkness, she moved across the battlefield with lanterns, looking for any sign of life. Many wounded men had been abandoned, left to bleed out or drown in the mud. She developed an uncanny, almost supernatural way of finding them. A skeptical officer once asked her, "How in God's name do you know where to look in this darkness, Mother Bickerdyke?" Her reply was simple and profound. "I smell 'em, sir. I can smell a soldier, and I can smell when a soldier's dying. And what's more, the hogs can find 'em too." She was referring to the wild pigs that were rooting out the bodies. With grim efficiency, she ordered her orderlies to herd the scavenging animals away, and instead she led them to the men who could still be saved. She gave water, a sip of brandy, a piece of dry bread, or just a soothing word. Her presence was often the only difference between a soldier dying alone and one surviving until morning. Chapter 5: Marching with Sherman to the Sea. As the war progressed, Mother Bickerdyke's services became indispensable to General Sherman's famous March to the Sea, the campaign that sliced through Georgia and South Carolina to break the Confederacy's will to fight. This was a brutal campaign, requiring the Army to live off the land, cutting themselves off from reliable supply lines. For Bickerdyke, this meant a greater reliance on her own ingenuity. She had to manage mobile hospitals with minimal resources. She became an expert in foraging. While the soldiers were instructed to take food, Bickerdyke's mission was humanitarian. She didn't just take, she organized.
She set up efficient foraging parties to gather chickens, eggs, vegetables, and grain, ensuring that the supply was steady and immediately converted into nutritious meals for the sick and wounded.
She insisted on fresh food. When scurvy began to set in, she didn't wait for official medical reports. She found local greens and wild onions and made sure every single sick soldier received a daily ration of boiled vegetables, effectively preventing a major health crisis. Her tireless devotion earned her the deepest affection from the soldiers. They knew that if they fell wounded, her presence meant clean bandages, a hot meal, and a chance to live. She never distinguished between a private and a general. Her care was absolute and immediate for anyone suffering. She knew thousands of men by name, and her touch, a rough hand on a fevered brow, was often described as the most comforting thing a soldier experienced in the war. The enduring legacy of the battlefield angel. When the war ended in 1865, Ann Bickerdyke had participated in 19 major battles, traveling thousands of miles. She had organized and managed hundreds of hospitals and had, by some estimates, directly or indirectly, saved the lives of tens of thousands of Union soldiers. Her work was not done. The post-war period brought new challenges: the discharged veterans. Chapter 6. Fighting for the Veterans. Bickerdyke's most heart-wrenching post-war fight was for the unpaid wages and pensions of the discharged soldiers. Many men, disabled and confused, were struggling to navigate the labyrinthian bureaucracy of the U.S. government. She moved to Kansas, drawn by the promise of the West and the need for her continued help. She became a tireless lobbyist and advocate. She would personally travel to Washington, D.C., and confront the powerful members of Congress and the War Department. Her reputation preceded her. When an official refused to process a soldier's pension claim, she would walk into his office, often unannounced, and refuse to leave until the paperwork was signed. She once camped out in the hallway of the Department of the Interior until the Secretary himself agreed to look into the claim she presented. She understood that a government official might be able to ignore a letter, but they could not ignore the woman who had nursed General Sherman's army. She established homes and schools for veterans and their children in Kansas. She was instrumental in the creation of the Soldiers' Home at Leavenworth. Her work transitioned seamlessly from the battlefield to the home front, driven by the simple belief that a nation had an absolute moral obligation to care for those who fought for it. In her later years, her efforts never flagged. She worked for the Salvation Army, helping the urban poor, and continued to lobby for the rights of former soldiers. She lived a humble life, often near poverty herself, because she routinely gave away any money she earned to help a struggling veteran. Ann Bickerdyke died in 1901 at the age of 84. Her funeral was attended by countless veterans who owed her their lives. Why her story astounds? Mother Bickerdyke's astonishing legacy is not simply about the number of lives saved, but the revolutionary nature of her impact on a system that was profoundly broken. The birth of battlefield sanity. She was the single most important non-official figure in professionalizing the care of the wounded. She understood and implemented modern sanitary principles, cleanliness, ventilation, and nutrition, years before the military medical establishment fully accepted them. She essentially brought the principles of Florence Nightingale, whom she had never met, to the American frontier, translating high-minded theory into brutal, practical reality. A triumphant civilian. Bickerdyke proved that moral authority could trump military rank. She operated outside the chain of command, yet generals trusted and supported her because her results were undeniable. She forced the rigid military system to bend to the needs of humanity, showing the power of dedicated civilian intervention during a national crisis. The unstoppable advocate.
Her story is the ultimate motivational text about persistence against bureaucracy and corruption. Time and again, when faced with laziness, drunkenness, theft, or paperwork, she did not complain, she acted. She broke rules for a moral reason, creating an ethical standard that shamed those in power into doing their jobs. Mother Bickerdyke was a fierce, profane, unyielding, and utterly compassionate woman. She was the farm wife who became the most powerful woman in the Union Army, not through status or rank, but through a colossal, unsinkable will to save lives. Her life is a powerful reminder that true leadership often emerges not from the ranks of the powerful, but from those who simply refuse to tolerate injustice and suffering. She is a monumental, astonishing figure of American history, a hero who fought the war not with a rifle, but with a kettle, a broom, and an unbreakable moral compass.